It is the Resistance Report for September 27th, 2017, where we connect the dots and give you context for what's happening. Today I'm going to be talking about first the new Republican tax plan, and then secondly, Puerto Rico, and thirdly, Trump's failure to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, and show you the big picture, and then take your questions. First, the tax plan that can only be described as payback time. Corporate and Wall Street Republicans have been salivating over getting a big tax cut since Donald Trump was elected. And today, Trump and the Republicans announced their package of treats. Now, here are the key ingredients. Please write these down. You're not going to get the straight story from Republicans and from Trump, and they're going to try to obfuscate and confuse the way they always do. And here are the 5 important pieces. Number 1, they want to lower corporate taxes from 35 to 20%. Now, this makes absolutely no sense. Right now, 35% is what corporations pay. They want to lower it to 25%. Why is that? I mean, today's effective corporate tax rate, that's what they actually pay after deductions and credits, is almost the same as our major trading partners. So the whole logic saying, oh, well, we're overtaxed because they are paying far less taxes than we are, that's baloney. Plus, American corporations today are already so flush with cash, they don't know what to do with it except buy back their current shares. And that's, in fact, what they are doing. CEOs, by the way, whose salaries, compensation packages depend upon the stock prices, they are buying back taxes with any extra, they are buying back shares of stock with any extra cash they have in order to put the taxes into basically shares of stock that get them higher wages, higher compensation packages. So this makes no sense. The second is they want to reduce the tax rate for so-called pass-through businesses. Now this is important. These pass-through businesses are hedge funds, private equity, real estate partnerships like Donald Trump's and Jared Kushner's. They want to reduce that to 25%. Now what that means is that Trump and Kushner and the hedge funds and all those others who are now at least supposed to be paying the top tax rate of 39.6%, they are actually going to be allowed to pay 25% because it's all going to be passed through. The 25% is going to be passed through to them. It's a giant loophole for not just the super wealthy, for the super wealthy. And they can't wait. And then number 3, lower the top tax rate for every other rich person in America from 39.6%, what it is now, to 35%. So the top tax rate on individuals goes from 39.6 to 35%. And they still keep their deductions. They're big deductions for mortgage interest. They have gigantic estates. They can deduct the interest on those mortgages. They have, they want to make so-called charitable contributions so they can get their names etched in Symphony Hall. They can continue to do that and take out a huge deduction on this. This is absurd. Hello? America's rich have gained the vast bulk of all the economic gains for the past decade. They are richer than ever. Why do they need a tax cut? And number 4, raise the bottom tax rate from 10%, which it is now, to 12%. Did you ever hear of anything more absurd? At a time in the nation's history when inequality is wider than it has ever been since the 1880s, we are going to increase taxes. They want to increase taxes on the poor and reduce taxes on the rich. Now, aren't the poor already poor enough? Now, it's true. The Republican tax plan does double the standard deduction and expands the child tax credit, which will offset much of this increase from 10 to 12%. But why increase taxes on the poor at all? What's going on here? Why? And if that were not all enough, they want to eliminate the estate tax. Now, you know, the estate tax is what the Republicans call the death tax, but in reality, it is only paid by the richest 0.2%. I mean, we're talking about a tiny little group of people. And it's only paid by them on estates over $11 million per couple. I mean, why do they need a tax cut? Oh, there's something else. So you get all of these tax cuts, right? The middle class is probably going to get about maybe a little tax increase. The rich do much, much better. The poor maybe a little worse. How much is all of this going to cost? Now, they didn't say today, but studies of similar plans produced by Trump and House Republicans have been projected to cost between, hold your hats, $3 trillion and $7 trillion. $3 trillion, $7 trillion over the next decade. Where will this money come from? Well, it's either going to come from cuts in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which really are the only big pots of money in the federal budget apart from defense spending, which Republicans want to increase, or from an exploding national budget deficit. So there you have it, folks. Tax cuts for those corporations and the rich. Having failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act and thereby shaft 32 million Americans, Republicans are now finding a new way to shaft most Americans and pay back their donors. You know, Donald Trump is going to lie and lie and lie and lie, and that is actually not surprising given all the lies he has already told. But he has already told one huge, huge lie that you ought to understand is a lie. He says that we are the highest taxed nation in the world. That is absolute rubbish. Look, the most meaningful measure of taxes is taxes paid as a percentage of the whole economy. So here you have a whole economy, let's say, this is the whole economy, and what percentage of this whole economy, called the gross domestic product, what percentage of this whole economy is paid by taxes? Well, on this score, the United States has the fourth lowest tax rate and total taxes of any major economy. I mean, you have only South Korea, Chile, and Mexico ranking lower. So this is the percentage of the total economy paid in taxes. The idea that we are overtaxed is absolutely absurd. American corporations themselves aren't overtaxed after taking deductions and tax credits. The typical U.S. corporation today pays an effective tax rate of 24%. Now, that's only a tad higher than the average of 21% among other advanced nations' corporations. But here's something we do have. We do have a national debt that topped $20 trillion this year and is expected to grow by an additional $10 trillion over the next decade. And we also have a deficit in public investment, especially education and infrastructure. And we are not aiding Americans who desperately need help, such as, for example, Americans in Puerto Rico, whom I will get to in a moment. So what is the answer? What should we be doing? What we ought to be doing is just the opposite. We ought to be raising taxes on big corporations and the wealthy. That is what rational politicians would do if they were not in the pockets of big corporations and the wealthy. That's a politician in the pocket of a wealthy person. Now, back to Puerto Rico for a second. Trump's patriotism, let me just make sure you have this. Trump's patriotism is highly selective. Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States, is facing a worsening humanitarian crisis following Hurricane Maria, as the island's 3.4 million people struggle to survive without power or clean water. So you've got this island, and this is part of the United States, folks. And you've got people here on this island, on Puerto Rico, who are now struggling. They don't have clean water. They don't have power. They don't expect power to be back on for 6 months. Food is running out. There is a huge humanitarian crisis. They are, again, part of the United States. Officials estimate the island could be without power for up to 6 months. That means in many places there is no water to drink or bathe in or to flush toilets. There are limited food and limited fuel and cell service. And it's already taken several days for reporters and rescue workers to even reach remote towns and villages. Photos are showing whole communities with roofs torn off and second floors of houses ripped apart, water flooding the streets. People resorting to waiting in long lines for clean water and fuel. In reports, the word apocalyptic is used often. Now, here's the thing. Puerto Ricans are American citizens. Hello, Trump? You're so concerned about American patriotism? Puerto Ricans are American citizens. They've been American citizens since 1917, which means they're protected by the same Constitution, the same Bill of Rights, as anyone else born in the United States. But for Donald Trump, patriotism means belittling football players, doesn't it? Rather than coming to the aid of Americans in dire need. Trump's comments, by the way, have not inspired confidence about Puerto Rico. He said recently, I think it was yesterday, this is an island sitting in the middle of an ocean. And it's a big ocean, he said. It's a very big ocean, and we're doing a really good job. A big ocean. Hello? Hello? This is not an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's not a big ocean. It's the Caribbean. Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean Sea. It's 2.5 hour flight from Miami. Some gasoline and food and clean water are on the docks, but they are not getting inland where they are needed. And today, just to add insult to injury, the Trump administration denied a request to waive shipping restrictions in order to help get supplies to the island more cheaply. The Department of Homeland Security, Trump's Homeland Security, refused to waive something called the Jones Act. Now, the Jones Act is not normally headline story, but you need to understand, Jones Act limits shipping between coasts to U.S. flagged vessels. Now, the DHS waived the act following Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, which hit the U.S. mainland, but refuses to waive the act for these people, Puerto Rican people who are Americans in Puerto Rico. This means that the people of Puerto Rico who are American citizens will have to pay at least twice as much. For food and clean drinking water and supplies and infrastructure. I'll tell you, honestly, Donald Trump, orange head, doesn't mean what it doesn't even know what it means to faithfully execute the law. Faithfully execute the law, Donald Trump. Faithfully execute the law. Don't just yell about people who are football players who are not standing up for the American flag, who are exercising their First Amendment rights. Don't just say Puerto Rico is someplace in an island. Tonight's text. the Constitution of the United States. In Article 2, Section 1, we're going to do this sometimes. Do you like us? Just do a text. Just select a text and talk about it. It says that the President shall swear to preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and faithfully execute the office of the President. And then in Article 2, Section 3, it says that the President will take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Now, protecting the Constitution and faithfully executing the laws, this is the essence of a president's responsibility. But what is Trump doing? His Department of Health and Human Services is not faithfully executing the Affordable Care Act, for example. It's doing whatever it can to subvert the Affordable Care Act. His Department of Education, it's not faithfully executing our laws governing public education. It's trying to give public money to private for-profit schools. His Environmental Protection Agency, it's not enforcing the Environmental Protection Act as it is supposed to do. It is repealing the Environmental Protection Act. His Justice Department, it's not enforcing the Civil Rights Act. It is intentionally disregarding the Civil Rights Act. His Labor Department is not enforcing the Fair Labor Standards Act or the Labor Management Relations Act. It is gutting them. Now, here's the bottom line. I have talked before about grounds for impeaching Donald Trump. There are many. We don't need to wait for Robert Mueller's investigation. Trump is not faithfully executing the laws of the United States. He's also violating the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, which bars government officials from getting anything of value from foreign governments. Whose officials now are staying at the Trump Hotel in Washington because they want to curry favor with Donald Trump, and he is collecting money on their stays there. He's obstructed justice in firing James Comey for wanting to pursue the Russian investigation. He's abused his power by lying repeatedly about voter fraud, lying about President Obama spying on him, lying about the Affordable Care Act, repeatedly lying to the American people, and by fomenting racial and ethnic tensions and divisions in America. The only reason Donald Trump has not been impeached is because Republicans control the House and Senate, and they continue to put the needs of their party over the needs and interests of America, which is where you come in. You have already done a great deal. You have saved the Affordable Care Act, for example. Congratulations. Well done. And now you have to make sure that this obscene tax plan that I talked about tonight, which was unveiled today by Republicans, never sees the light of day. And also that the Trump administration responds to the desperate needs of people in need, like the Americans in Puerto Rico. We all have our work cut out for us. This is a test of us, a test of the Constitution, a test of America. And now your questions. I'm going to put on my glasses so I can actually read your questions. Okay, Naira Montesino, can waiving the Jones Act for Puerto Rico help the island? Yes, Naira, absolutely. The Jones Act, again, restricts the numbers of ships. They have to be particular American flag ships, and that increases the cost of shipping. You waive the Jones Act, and it means that people in Puerto Rico can actually get much more cheaply. I mean, it's going to be half the cost if you waive the Jones Act. Food and materials and supplies they need and gasoline. So the Jones Act has to be waived, even though Trump doesn't want to do it. Chris Gee, how can we fight back against the Republican tax agenda? Well, Chris, I think the only way to do that is to make sure your members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, know that you are firmly against giving big tax breaks to the wealthy and also increasing taxes on the poor and jeopardizing and threatening Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Make your voices clear. Call your congressional members of Congress and also your senators. Be clear and get many other people to do that. This is an obscene tax bill. Jane Smith, you say, Graham Cassidy is done, but should we be worried about Republicans using reconciliation to try to overhaul health care in 2018? Yes. Look, every time, Jane, we think that this zombie bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act is dead, it comes back. So we can't lose our vigilance. We can't put down our guard. But at least for now, it is safe. My biggest fear, honestly, is that the Department of Health and Human Services and the Trump White House are going to try to subvert the Affordable Care Act by, for example, not letting people know when to register or how to register, or delaying the payments to insurance companies. So insurance companies are left in the lurch, and insurance companies have no choice but to drop out of the Affordable Care Act exchanges. But if they do, we have got to hold them accountable. Suzanne Gould, is it under Trump's jurisdiction to sign an executive order on health care as threatened? Well, Suzanne, if you're talking about some of the things I just mentioned, that is, executive orders that subvert and undermine the Affordable Health Care Act, a president can certainly issue executive orders, but there is this background question about faithfully executing the law. The law of the land is now the Affordable Care Act. It was passed by Congress. It was signed by a former president. It is still the law of the land. If Donald Trump doesn't faithfully execute that and subverts it instead, that is another ground for impeachment. And finally, Christopher Scott, oh no, we have two more. Christopher Scott Zidell, if the minimum wage were $15 an hour, wouldn't retail stores start cutting workers' hours out of greed? Would laws have to be passed to prevent retail and food service employers from cutting employee hours? Christopher, actually, the studies that have been done on minimum wage increases have shown that when you increase the minimum wage, actually what happens is a lot of people who are on the edge of the labor market come in and seek jobs. And that increases the pool of labor available to retail employers and others who are seeking to hire people. And that in turn gives them more reliable workers and reduces turnover and makes it actually less costly for them to have workers. It is a saving, not a cost burden. Finally, Martin Gilbert, who does it mean to, or what does it mean to organize and take action? I want to help out, but I don't know where or how to start. Well, bear with me, Martin. I'll be right back. I have talked about this before, Martin, and I'd like you, just to start with, go to invisibleguide.com. Invisibleguide.com. It will tell you who you can contact in your area already working on these kinds of issues. Indivisibleguide.com. And also another very important group is swingleft.org, and that website will give you information about the closest district, congressional district to you that is possibly going to go blue and Democratic in 2018, and you can help out in that. There are other websites I will give you from time to time, but basically what you need to do is stop watching as much television or stop spending as much time on the computer, except, of course, for the Resistance Report, and use your time to actually mobilize and organize. Canvassing is door-to-door work. There's no substitute for it, and it's hard work. Believe me, I've done it for years. You have to do it. You have to do it, neighbor to neighbor, person to person. That is the best way of convincing people and opening their minds and opening your mind. I mean, maybe that they disagree with you and they have good reasons, and you've got to be able to talk to them. One of the big problems in America now is we're not talking to each other, and we need to talk to each other. And Donald Trump is making it more important than ever that we talk to each other. So I want to thank you again for joining us tonight, and the us tonight, Sasha Lightman, and also tonight, Kyle Parker, and thank them for their help, and thank you for tuning in.